So, I'm Joshua, and
I'm Jaden.
yes. And today, in the official first episode of our podcast that I haven't come up with a title for yet,
Yeah,
might have a title by the time this is actually uploaded, but doesn't matter.
if it's uploaded.
Today, yeah, but today's episode is going to be talking about the 90s WB cartoons with Steven Spielberg, but some of them not with Steven Spielberg. But today, we're going to be talking about Tiny Toons, Tasmania, Animaniacs, Freakazoid, The Summer Pink and the Brain Show, and any other great things, maybe the reboots of those shows if they have any, and Celestial Mysteries also because you watched the whole first season of that on your channel.
Yeah, and also some other episodes from. I watched some episodes from every season. I watched every season one episode, and then I watched like some segments from the other couple seasons. Also, Tweety Sci-Fi Adventure, but not King Tweety because I don't really like the art style. But maybe it's like secretly amazing or something. I'm missing out on some peak content. Any
What
King Tweety fans of that King Tweety movie specifically, please tell me in the comments I'm missing out on something incredible and amazing.
while we're at it, we also talk about the Looney Tunes show also, and basically like every Looney Tunes TV show because we're basically just talking about everything now.
Also, that Pete Browngar one, and you know what he also created? The classic Uncle Grandpa.
Yeah, that.
Also, a Duck Dodgers, which I watched every episode of, and it's pretty good.
I was thinking
So
about also talking about Looney Tunes movies, but
maybe
that
this
might.
could be like a multi-part series about Warner Bros. Looney Tunes stuff.
This part could just be focused on 90s stuff, and then we transition to the movies and Looney Tunes show and all the other stuff in the second part. But for the first part, we're going to be talking about Tiny Toon Adventures, which, if you don't know the plot but are still for some reason watching this, basically, like the basic plot is that there's a younger generation of cartoon characters, loosely based on old Looney Tunes characters. Then they go to a school to learn how to be the best cartoon characters, the next generation of cartoon characters, basically, from the old Looney Tunes characters. And do you have any opinion on it? I watched every episode of it. Like, I don't know how long ago it was. I know it wasn't this year. It was some time ago, I know. I watched every episode of it. And I don't know why I did that. I just had some kind of interest in it.
I haven't seen a whole lot of the show. I remember like way back when. This was almost like a decade ago. Well, not. It was kind of like. I'm pretty sure that the stuff got added to Hulu around the time the Animaniacs reboot was announced to be in development, which was like 2017, 2018. And Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain and Tiny Toons and a bunch of other stuff was added to Hulu. And back then, when I watched it when I was like a younger kid, like 8 to 10, whatever, I didn't like it. I kept putting it on even though I didn't like it. I don't really know why. I liked Plucky. I remember that because Daffy was my favorite character. He still is my favorite classic Looney Tunes character. But I think what I didn't like about it is that I didn't really like the characters. I think that like every episode was just so meta, and this was like at the point where basically everything I watched had some kind of meta joke or was just idiotic nonsense. So I just didn't really like it that much, and I gravitated more towards Animaniacs, which is less referential and less meta, though it still was. And I don't remember any episode of Animaniacs that I liked more than any other episode, so I don't really know why I gravitated more towards Animaniacs. Because while it is less referential and meta, it still has quite a lot of both of those things. So I don't really know what made me make the distinction of the amount of those types of humor in comparison.
I remember back in the day. Oh yeah, I have a theory. It's like a more personal little thing. But we used to have this Animaniacs book from the 90s. I don't know why we even had that. But that probably related to us gravitating more towards Animaniacs. Because we had that book as a special attachment. So, that's a really stupid reason, but it probably makes sense considering that we were kids back then. I remember not really liking Titans that much. I would still put it on to like make an attempt to like it, but I still liked it a little bit, but not enough to actually actively go out and watch it like Animaniacs. I remember, as you said, I remember liking Plucky. I remember a couple of episodes. I remember the episode with Buster having a pet dinosaur. I know the name. I just do not want to say it because I'm too lazy. I also remember the prom episode. I remember a couple other moments and stuff, but I just didn't really like how meta it was because, and even now sometimes, like when I rewatched the show. Well, I liked it when I was rewatching it. But now looking back on it, it just kind of seemed like they're being meta and making pop culture references as a crutch. Which, if you watch the show in order and you get to season 3, you can see that with some episodes, some of them were just weak. Like, there's a segment in season 3, the whole episode, A Cat's Eye View, is not one of the better ones. But the segment Party Crasher Plucky is just a series of celebrity cameos and caricatures and stuff. The animation's by Acom, so you already know it's just not going to be appealing. But the whole segment, it's just celebrity cameos and stuff. The only thing that was funny was the John Candied Yams, which is just so stupid that it's just funny. According to the credits gag they have at the end of the episode, that was Sherry Stoner's favorite bit. She wrote the episode, by the way. But at that point, you could just tell they were just kind of using references and parodies and stuff as a crutch rather than them just trying to use it to make jokes like Animaniacs did. Some Animaniacs segments, which I'll touch on later, some shorts, some characters, were basically just parodies, but they did something with them, and they were funny to me without having the full knowledge of what they were referencing. With some Titans episodes, even some ones that I enjoy, like Hollywood Plucky and 13 something, rely a lot on references and stuff.
You're basically doing like most of the heavy lifting for this.
I did watch
I
every
made a
episode.
joke in the thing, like we recorded before this little pilot test thing, about how it's gonna be like a crossbeat cross reference of my channel, because I see sometimes videos are uploaded and they link to like 3 channels instead of just 1 channel. So I don't even know how you would even achieve such a thing. But I'm not really having much more presence. But maybe we'll like have more presence later on when we move to Animaniacs. But I have watched some episodes that you showed me. I'm gonna assume that you're showing me like the cream of the crop. Plus, I rewatched some episodes I remember from childhood, and I think that I don't really have the whole perspective of how the show evolved and changed over the years. Besides watching the Employee Million retrospective of it, based on my memories, but I don't really think about any specific bits from Tiny Toons a lot like you do with Animaniacs, because I'm pretty sure I watched it, like it was still on my mind as a kid, but it was just way less memorable than Animaniacs. I'm pretty sure that I have seen every episode of Tiny Toons at least like twice, like throughout the kid years, and no jokes really stuck out to me. No specific ideas or segments. Besides the Odd Couple parody episode with Hampton and Dizzy, I don't think I like that one like any more than any other episode, but it stuck out to me when I rewatched it at some point. Also,
Well,
maybe
since so your overall opinion on the show, was it now that you've seen a few episodes, so that way I can get my stuff out of the way?
well, what I think is that like sometimes maybe there's more like earlier on, but they tried too hard to do specific references and remakes of old Looney Tunes and basically just making the characters just like replacements for them to where it kind of falls flat. So sometimes it feels like it's trying too hard to be like the old stuff, but other times it's trying to too hard to be hip and new and trendy by having incredibly dated 80s and 90s references. More 80s because you can kind of tell that this was made in like 1988, 89, and not actually the 90s for like season 1. And so it's kind of a time capsule of the era. Also, you have to consider like how varied the animation is from going terrible to really good. Also, as a time capsule representing the era. But I think that sometimes they strike a middle ground between having it be kind of modern and different enough to where it's unique without feeling super cringe and try hard with the references. And
What? What?
I think that's it. Basically, I might just chime in with something later.
Well, my overall opinion on the show, I basically share your opinion, but I have the extra enhanced knowledge of watching every episode for some reason. And I've come to the conclusion that a lot of the times when it's just basically it's not trying well, I don't think it takes like enough advantage of the premise. Like the only thing I'll give the reboot is that it takes more advantage of the concept of them learning to be the cartoon characters. But I'm glad that didn't like focus too much on the concept in the original. because it did allow it to be its own thing. So when it does something like the previously mentioned 13 something and Hollywood Plucky and some other episodes I really like where they do their own things with the characters, and the whole episode Test Dress is pretty good. Where they try to do their own things with the characters, not just try to rip off older Looney Tunes. And when they explore the history, like in Two Tone Town or Fields of Honey, basically when they try to do their own thing, not try to rip off the old stuff, or just try way too hard to be hip and trendy with the kids, then it's pretty good. But some of them, like I previously mentioned, especially in the third season, they just rely way too much on references. And then some other times in the first season, they just try to do some emotional beats and it just does not work at all. Like starting from scratch, it just sucks. It's a parody of American Tail with some stupid fleas that I do not care about. They made a sequel episode for some reason, and in the wraparound opening scene, cold open with Buster, they talk about them being underused characters. Who thought that? I guess the writer who wrote the second flea episode thought that.
But I guess you could
But it's
say that any
also
character that only appeared once is underused, but that implies that there's no value for them to be used more than once. And usually, when you say something is under blank, you usually think that it's not like the amount that you expect that they will be used given the quality.
well, there's starting from scratch. There's also my least favorite episode of the whole show, Whale's Tales. I haven't rewatched those old Tiny Toons videos that I made, but I'm pretty sure that some of the stuff I probably wouldn't really agree with today. But Whale's Tale is just my least favorite. It doesn't even feel like it's trying to be funny. It just kind of feels super, very much forced. Like they just didn't even really put that much effort into trying to make it funny or unlike any of those other typical 80s trash shows trying to push some kind of lesson. And transition, well, not really transition, but back to pop culture references thing you said earlier, where they're talking about referencing stuff more in the 80s. The Whale's Tales episode feels like the type of thing that would come out of some typical 80s trash show, along with references to An American Tail and Batman 89 and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And of course, they're gonna throw in some references to Ninja Turtles and other stuff that's popular, but they just kind of they shave more, along with the previously mentioned random celebrity cameos and stuff.
Also,
But I
one
think that
like
overall, when Tiny Toons tries to do its own thing, it's actually funny and good. When it tries to chase trends, do pop culture references, it just resort to random shticks that just doesn't work at all. Then it's just not really good. It kind of dates the show, and basically just makes it into the stupid stereotype that some people probably think it is.
well, I don't think there's much of like I've never heard of like much of a Tiny Toons fandom. I guess I don't really know what the general public opinion is on that. But one thing about the pop culture references is that, like, if you watch the old Looney Tunes, Warner Bros. Cartoons, and I guess you could also lump in the MGM ones, but to a lesser extent, they're very indicative of the time, but not with like any kind of stereotypes or anything. Just like the specific pop culture references, specifically parodying films and archetypes. But it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot worse when you're making like 65 episodes of a TV show, and obviously the writing isn't going to be as good because sometimes they have full length stories, sometimes they're like little shorts, and also the animation isn't going to be as good. So I don't think that there should be any direct comparison with the original. I think that's kind of something that Animaniacs has its own characters, while Tiny Toons tries to kind of base itself off the old Looney Tunes. So obviously it's going to draw comparisons, and obviously Tiny Toons being a '90s TV show isn't going to be as good as those theatrical shorts. And I just completely lost track of what my original point was.
Since
But
you're talking about the pop culture references and comparing it to
I
old
think like with like
shorts and stuff,
Warner Bros. Cartoons and stuff, that stuff, like when I was watching it on TV, they didn't really show. Well, I don't remember them showing a lot of stuff that relied heavily on pop culture, like the Hollywood parody ones. But I think that you can recognize that that stuff is just so old that you don't even recognize it. But even though I was born in like the late 2000s, I recognize some of the 90s culture and stuff because there's nostalgic big cash grab things happening when I was growing up. So I understand some of the 90s culture makes it more cringe, but if like there's like a random Jimmy Cagney reference or whatever that I don't even know if that's even like some guy's name. References like a '40s Bugs Bunny cartoon. I'm not gonna know who that is, so I don't really care. And I just assume this is like funny caricature person. And sometimes I just absorb like these famous personalities of the era through like pop culture osmosis, and by that I mean that I probably looked them up or just saw them parodied in other shows or referenced somewhere. So I kind of know the persona of them without actually knowing their name. So it kind of has a way. And sometimes, like what Tiny Toons did, they just have happened to reference stuff that was popular then and was still popular like 40 years later. But sometimes they just weren't really lucky on that front.
And about the old shorts and the pop culture references and they being so old they just don't even know what it is. I think that eventually Tiny Toons is probably going to reach that status where people just. Well, Tiny Toons mostly referenced. Sometimes referenced popular things like Batman, Star Trek, Pee Wee Herman, of course the classic Looney Tunes, and celebrities that are going to be known forever and ever, and plus stuff that already had a legendary status when Tiny Toons came out. But a lot of those old references, like some of the celebrity cameos that I previously mentioned, a lot of those old references, they're not like the old shorts where they're just so old and the cameos and characters just look so ridiculous. But you know it's an old celebrity. Since the show isn't that old, you feel like it's supposed to be in on some kind of joke, but it's just not really like that funny. Especially considering how it's just random and dumb what you've done with the celebrity. And since a lot of these are just like forgotten, it's just nothing good.
I think with Animaniacs, they did a better job of incorporate. Well, first off, there was less like random celebrity cameos and references. Well, I felt that there was less of those. And also, they did a better job of making them more exaggerated, giving them more exaggerated features, and also having them have exaggerated voices. So you kind of know that it's supposed to be a specific parody of someone and not just confuse it with some random background character. But you could like correct me if I'm wrong about that. If Animaniacs actually improved upon that, because I
It did. I think Animaniacs is. Let's just switch over to Animaniacs since we're going to be
so
talking about it. But Animaniacs relied on a. Well, there isn't like a specific plot or anything. It basically just evolves. With the main characters, the Warner siblings were fictional old cartoon characters made from Warner Brothers in the late 20s, early 30s. And they're such nuisances around the studio that they locked them up for like 60 years or so until they were released in the 90s. They don't say whether or not they released it. I think they say they escaped. I guess they're just sitting in that tower the whole time. Also, it looks like it locks on the inside, which is just bad design. But they just run around and just do stuff. They cause havoc and mayhem and whatnot. And there's also a bunch of other characters and stuff. I don't really feel like explaining all the characters. You probably already know. But I think, a personal opinion, and probably like a bunch of people's opinion too, but I think Animaniacs is funnier than Tiny Toons. For one, they have their own characters, so they can make their own dynamics, their own style of comedy, which like mostly usually works. But also, since they had like 3 seasons of experience worth on Tiny Toons, they knew, like sometimes, they knew what worked and what didn't, so they knew how to do that stuff. I think there's more of an attempt to make it feel like old Warner Bros. Without directly ripping it off. There's a great episode, the 65th anniversary spectacular, whatever the episode's called, which features a bunch of Looney Tunes characters as cameos, but also digs deep into the Warner Bros. Archives to find Buddy, probably the worst, most forgettable, and boring Looney Tunes character ever to be made, and they make a great plot around it. Not only is the episode funny because it digs into the Looney Tunes archives and they make an actual story about it, it's basically like a better version of Fields of Honey and Two Tone Town, which also dig into the Warner Bros. Archives. But this episode is
those
also held by
ones.
the TMS animation, and TMS did the best work for Tiny Toon and Animaniacs.
Also, I'm a big fan of Star Tunes. Also, something I forgot to mention is that there's one really funny like pop culture reference in Tiny Toons, which is in the time travel one where they reference Back to the Future and they talk about it being a shameless plug because Steven Spielberg produced that and those produced Tiny Toons. That's what I remember.
But yeah, he also liked this in Buster and Babs Go Hawaiian, where Steven Spielberg cameos as himself, and it's him voicing himself. That episode was also by TMS and Random Tangents, the animation studios, but as previously mentioned, TMS did the best work on Tiny Toons and Animaniacs, and basically like every show they've ever worked on, they're usually the best studio or like one of the best studios. Top tier Japanese animation. I don't think I don't think they do work for American cartoons anymore, but
I like Star Tunes on.
I like Star Toons too.
Also, like Wang, like the first 3 seasons of Animaniacs when they had a Wang animated episode, you could go from decent to good, but you knew you were gonna get some like talented animators.
And sometimes it was great, specifically with Pink and the Brain stuff. And there's also some random spots and some Good Feathers episodes of all things where the animation is really great. I think it's with Three You Get Egg Rolls specifically is the one I'm thinking
That
of.
was Wang.
Yeah, that's Wang.
Huh.
But usually with TMS or Wang, TMS was only on the first season. Then they did the Wacko's Wish movie, and then the one episode, well, not then, but they did one season 4 episode, then the Wacko's Wish movie. And Wang worked throughout the whole entire show. But after season 3, well, after the second season, when the show moved from Fox Kids to Kids WB, well, like basically everything about the show downgraded, but Wang's animation, it didn't downgrade instantly by seasons 4 and 5. You could basically barely tell the difference between them and ACOM, who had actually gotten better somehow. Still not the best, but better. ACOM's work on Animaniacs is better than their Tiny Toons work, and I do not know how to explain it. It's just better.
I guess they just got some experience in how to animate good. And something I love about the more Western studios like Star Tunes, you can also tell us with the classic Warner Brothers shorts. Also, you can kind of see with Wang, but that's not Western, so I'm just gonna stick to Star Tunes. Is that you can tell that different animators with different styles worked on it. So that's something that I think is like adds a charm to it. Even if the animation itself isn't the best, they have some really nice poses, which isn't something you get with TMS. Though TMS has some incredible animation, and obviously the storyboarding helped with it a lot in terms of like the expression and stuff. So Animaniacs is a sketch comedy, and it's all sorts of characters. So I guess now we have to discuss the characters. Well, not all of them, but we can just talk about which ones you like or which ones are notable.
Since we're sorry to interrupt you, not really. Ouch! This is obvious. This is gonna be cut out.
Okay.
Probably
You were already interrupting. I was at the end of my sentence, anyways. It was gonna lead into you.
okay. What I was gonna
Animaniacs.
I was gonna talk about the other studios that worked on Tiny Toons and some of Animaniacs, and it's also gonna talk about some of the other shows with some of the same studios. But I want to talk about Freelance. They did the 3 Tiny Toons episodes they did. I think the 2 they did in the first season. I don't remember what both of them were. I don't remember either of them being that good. But the one they did in the 3rd season has pretty decent animation, and it's one of my favorites of the whole show, called Toon's Takeover, which is basically about Buster, Babs, and Plucky directing their own shorts. And it basically just turns to a huge disaster. The animation that they did there was pretty decent. The stuff they did on Animaniacs was sometimes competent, sometimes good, sometimes not. I want to specifically mention the Rita and Run shorts, which are their best work for some reason, because they put all their effort into that. But most of the stuff they did was either with the Warners, or Rita and Runt and Katie Kabim. But some of the Rita and Runt stuff is actually pretty decent and impressive, but some of the other stuff just looks hideous. And you can see how each studio, if you watch the show and know the difference between the studios, well, it's not that hard because each studio basically has their own character designs for each character. It's mostly different with the Warners, but there's some different kind of proportions and stuff the other studios get the other characters. So you can kind of tell when they're animating something, but the basic character designs and
I
models
think it's
remain
like
the same.
hardest.
Meanwhile, with the Warners, basically like every studio has their own little separate design.
I think it's probably hardest to tell with Pinky and the Brain. I don't really have like any animation studio preferences, but as long as like TMS or Star Tunes or Wang, I'm usually pretty decent on the animation side of things. Sometimes, yeah, TMS is usually like the best out of those 3, but as long as it's one of those, and obviously Wang could be the weakest out of those 3, but usually for some decent animation. Now onto the characters. Obviously, like
Wait, I didn't talk fully yet
about what?
about the studios. I didn't talk about Kennedy cartoons. I didn't talk about Encore cartoons. They suck. They only made it 3 episodes. Not important at all. Anyways, about Kennedy cartoons. Kennedy gets a lot of flack because of how inconsistent it is, how the characters are jumping and bouncing around all the time. Really, that's basically only true for the guy who headed the studio, Glenn Kennedy. And if you watch the episode in production order, for some reason, if you organize it or you just know, the episodes going by production order, the animation just starts to get worse and worse until they have to get Wang to co-animate some episodes. In the very beginning, it's incredibly obvious, but Glenn Kennedy actually had some talented animators working for him, including John McClanahan, who founded StarToons, David Weiss, John Williamson. Glenn Kennedy himself was talented. But then they had some awful animators like Harold Duckett, and the fact that those animators, well, I don't know, I don't even know. Just some of the animators are obviously not as talented as others. Kind of like with StarToons, but StarToons got the untalented animators kicked out, or they improved the animation skills instantly. But with Glenn Kennedy, since you could basically tell every animator instantly, because I guess there wasn't some kind of any kind of style of anything under the studio. Meanwhile, with StarToons, with the 3 times episodes they did, you can tell they're slowly smoothing out their style for their later work in Animaniacs and Tasmania and stuff. But the 3 episodes
Also,
for
didn't
Tiny they did Henny Youngman Day, 13 something, and the Christmas episode. The Christmas episode doesn't really look that good and is pretty weak overall, but the other 2 episodes look great, and 13 something is one of my favorites.
think Henry cartoons also work at Disney with Darkwing
They
Duck.
worked at they worked at Disney on a few shows, but by that time their style was more ironed out. I don't know if Kennedy Cartoons did anything, like the studio itself, did anything before Tiny Toons. Maybe this was their first work and they didn't know how to really. I think this actually was their first work because Kennedy was hired to work on Tiny Toons because Tom Ruger, who created the show to create Tiny Toons and Animaniacs, worked with him on a pop named Scooby Doo and liked the style. So that's why he wanted him to come work on Tiny Toons. So I think this is the first thing that Kennedy Cartoons ever did. So that's why the
So like
style is so inconsistent.
before that, Glenn Kennedy was an animation director at Wang on
He was
Rescue
he
Rangers
was a
and Puppet and Scooby
supervisor.
Doo.
Yeah, he worked he worked on 1 episode of Rescue Rangers, The Figment to Your Leader, which is a really good episode, and you can very obviously see Glenn Kennedy's influence on the Wang team, including some scenes that it looks like he animated.
So is
Okay,
that a new animation thing?
uh, uh, oh yeah, during the Kids WB era, we can go and talk about the characters because we're going to talk about the separate seasons and stuff. I
Well,
haven't talked about the
the
characters.
Warner segments. Well, I don't think like what my favorite segment is. It just kind of depends. Like, if I'm thinking about a really funny Warner segment, I'll say the Warners. But if I actually watch the show, and there's like 5 really great Pink in the Brain segments that I watch, then I'll say that Pink in the Brain is my favorite. Actually, I've never said that, but hypothetically. But my favorite segment just kind of changes. Like the Warner segments, at least for like the first 3 seasons, the Warner segments and the Slappy segments were pretty reliable in being either good or great. The Pink of the Brain ones, I think I've always had kind of a weird opinion on that because, like, as a kid, you got the Pink of the Brain Volume 1 DVD of the spin off show. I didn't really like it because it didn't have the same style of wacky humor as Animaniacs, so I didn't really like it. And then that dislike kind of reflected onto the main Pink of the Brain segments, even though they were totally different writing wise compared to the separate series. But with dumb little kid brain didn't comprehend that for some reason. So I think I'm now watching these and being able to separate these from the separate show. I'd say that they're still good, though I think it kind of depends. But sometimes I prefer like them having a more developed story for this spin-off show. But sometimes the wackier slapstick antics of the main show are better. But just kind of depends on the mood that I'm in. Though usually I wouldn't like specifically choose to watch the spin-off show. I just watch Animaniacs. And one of like the best things about Animaniacs is that, like if you're watching a Looney Tunes compilation show on TV, which I'm pretty sure they had those at the time, is that you never knew which characters you were going to get, which I guess is like another minus for Tiny Toons, because you usually knew which characters you were going to get, even if they do bring back some like obscure character or whatever.
Well, with Tiny Toons didn't have as much of a variety in segment length or segment format. It usually does some kind of wraparound scene to basically tell you the theme what you were getting, which is pretty cool. But with Animaniacs, obviously they weren't going to do that. Besides like a couple times they did that. Usually it's just random segments paired together, but some with some kind of very loose connective tissue. What do you want to talk about? Did you talk about Slappy yet?
No, I didn't. I think that Slappy Squirrel was probably like my favorite one. Even as a kid, I liked those ones. I think that usually she's somewhere in like the top two, switching spots with the Warners. And I think that something that you wouldn't really expect from these shows, or at least not expect to be done well, is to have like some kind of sweet bond between the characters. I think that Slappy and Skippy have a very sweet bond, which isn't something that you can say that these shows like try to accomplish. And I don't think that besides like the season 4 premiere, which some people don't like that episode, but I really like that episode. I think that does a really good job at showing their bond, and it was like a really good. I really like that episode. I think that's part of the appeal of these segments. That sometimes it's just kind of slapping on around, and Skippy basically just has like a little cameo. But I think that these were like the only segment that was consistently good. Like even if maybe like one was like mediocre or something, you could at least expect like a good line or two, which isn't something I can say for any other segment.
Or maybe like the Good Feathers, sometimes.
Well, like, well, yeah, some of those were kind of mediocre, but there's still like maybe like a decent gag or two, and some of those. It's really weird. Cause like, oh yeah. Well, speaking of the good feathers, I think there's
Wait,
probably like, oh, okay,
why did you say it like that? Anyways, I just realized that I've just been sitting here doing nothing while you've been doing all the talking. And I want to
all
give
right.
my opinions on the segments. I really like the Warner segments, but later on, well, when they made the switch from Fox Kids to Kids WB, basically everything got worse. They hired some new, worse animation studios like Coco Enterprises, which just Acon, but worse and more cheap somehow. And the writing got less funny. They started using the good feathers more often. Wait, did they? No, they did all that in season 2 with just the leftover garbage stuff.
I think like
The buds and mini
wait until
segments got
later
better.
to discuss that.
Yeah, I was done. But the Warners were good. My favorite segment is probably, if I were to think of one off the top of my head, it would probably be Hooked on a Ceiling, which was Michael Anderson and Steven Spielberg making the random cameo appearance at the end.
Spoilers.
Uh, well, I think if I were to think of one randomly off the top of my head, that would probably be it. But there's so many amazing segments and so many great moments that just get less and less as the show goes on, obviously. But
Well, I mean,
Pink and
obviously,
the Brand
season
are
one is
pretty
going to
good.
have the advantage with it being 65 episodes and there only being like 30 other episodes.
Oh, yeah. Well, for Pink and the Brain, I think the thing that I like most about them is that I really like their dynamic. And also, since I had the show on DVD as a kid, I think I got more used to their adventures being a full 20-minute episode length rather than it just being like a 7-minute segment. And so I had to get used again to Brain's plans being a lot more stupid and simple and like not really logical at all. But one thing that I really like throughout all the segments, even if the animation is weak, the one thing that they always get right is Pink and Brain's dynamic, and Pink is just really funny, and his voice performance by Rob Paulson is perfect. So that's the one thing that they usually get right, and even the reboot sometimes got that right. Sometimes.
I think that I prefer like the deeper voice he had earlier on because sometimes, like especially in the spin-off series, it could get kind of annoying with this stupidity. And I think that, oh, I mean, we might as well discuss the spin-off in tandem, but I don't know what you want to do with that.
We will
But
discuss that after we finish discussing all the stuff about Animaniacs.
uh,
As for my opinion on the sloppy segments for the first season, it's just amazing. Every single segment is some kind of variation of good or great. The voice performance for Sloppy by Shay Turner is always great, and even if the line is wouldn't really be that funny if they had like the worst voice performance possible, her voice performance and combined with her actually writing and creating most of the segments, and also the excellent Star Tunes animation, really adds to all the comedy and stuff. The Kids AB segments were were mostly fine. The season 4 premiere, One Flew Over the Cuckoo Clock, is a pretty good one, but most of the other ones were fine. I don't remember any of them that I liked specifically, besides the one with her on vacation. I liked that one a little bit. One of them that I didn't really like at all. Not that I hated it. It's just not one I'll watch ever again ever. I'm pretty sure it was called The Christmas Tree. Sloppy just didn't really feel like in character in that one. She wasn't as mean as she was before, and also she shrunk down to the size of an actual squirrel instead of being like human sized, which is just weird. And Tom Ruger, I'm pretty sure, is one of the writers of that episode, and he created the show and the character. So that's just weird. I guess there wasn't as much quality control going on. Also, the animation is by Wang, but it is just worse than usual.
I was about to.
I'm pretty sure it was by Wang. It might have been by Coco. I don't remember. And then one of the other ones that just sucked was the Sunshine Squirrels. The Sunshine Squirrels. The animation's by Coco, so already it sucked. But it's just extra long. It's like 10 minutes long for no reason. It's just an overly drawn out parody of some movie that I don't even. It's a parody of a movie under that. But I'm only mentioning that because it's just so long. It just seems like it's supposed to be a parody. It's just not funny. It just goes on
Was that
so
the one
long,
where she
so
like
long.
reunites with her old, with like one of her old acting buddies or something?
Yeah,
They have to do a revival of the performance or whatever.
yeah.
Also, we have to give a little mention. I don't.
The Sunshine Squirrels was paired with the Carpool, which is one of the better Warner segments. One of the better later Warner segments, even though the animation by Coco is just
I
not that
think
good.
they literally basically ripped it off in the reboot with Scott Smith in season 3. I think season 3 reboot. And we have to give a mention, like a little side thing, to the music. And the music really elevates, like even episodes with awful animation. I mean, there's not really that many episodes in Animaniacs with awful animation like there's in Tiny Toons. Something you can say for Animaniacs and Tiny Toons and the sister series, that the music is always great and always elevates. Like even if the voice acting and animation is great, the music just elevates it to a whole nother level, which is also something that's true of the old Warner Bros. Cartoons. And earlier was about the transition into the Goodfeathers, and I think that's just such a ridiculous concept. It turned a gritty R-rated crime thriller movie into bird characters for children.
And basically, most of their dialogue is just awful bird puns and random Italian stereotypes of the random references to the movie just thrown in occasionally. But I find it really funny because the concept is just stupid, even though I haven't even seen the movie, so I don't even know the references that you're making. But it's just such a ridiculous concept. And they actually really like their characters, but a lot of their segments just relies on parodies of movies that I haven't even seen or I don't even know anything about. So those ones where it's just parodies, just straight up parodies and no comedy, just fall flat. But ones that actually try to do something and end up being good, like Raging Bird, which is a movie parody, but that one's pretty good. And also with Do You Get Eggroll, that one isn't a parody, but they actually did something with the characters, so it ended up being good. And I also liked Good Feathers at the beginning. It was a little bit drawn out, but I still liked it, even though the animation by Acom was very much weak.
It's very weird, like, I don't know if this, like, since there's a sketch show with a bunch of different segments produced at different times, but different animation studios, and some will have more rushed production, some will be given more time and attention and budget. But it's very weird when you get, like, so many ACOM segments during the beginning, like with Good Feathers and Buttons and Mindy or whatever. Where they have ACOM animate those. I guess they thought those are more like B segments, but I think that there was like a TMS, there were like TMS Good Feathers segment at some point.
There
So maybe
was one
those
TMS
took
Good
longer to
Feathers segment.
finish, but I would have thought that they would have had some of the best animation stuff more towards the beginning, and not have the very first episode have animation by ACOM in the last segment or whatever studio that was. It didn't look good.
Freelance.
That was the point. But I mean, you think they want to front load the season with all like the best stuff, but I guess since it's 65 episodes,
Well,
they had
I
to
think
spread the
in
best
terms
parts out
of,
more evenly. Even though a lot of like the best stuff came in like the beginning and middle of the season.
well, the quality of the season kind of goes down at the end. Not to say that, well, some of them near the end just weren't really that good, but it was more like a consistent good quality rather than a consistent great quality with a few duds like in the rest of the first season. But anyways, let's transition to some of the other characters that aren't that good.
Okay, first off, since those are all the characters that we
Wait,
like, basically,
first let's talk about Reed and Run because that's like the perfect middle ground. I really like the characters. I don't really like their segments that much. I like Bernadette Peters when she sings, and I like the characters and the character interactions and stuff. But most of the segments just seem like they're an excuse for her to sing, which she is a great singer, but they don't really make very funny cartoons. I like When Rita Van Run. That's the only one that I really remember off the top of my head as me liking. But most of the other ones don't really do that much for me.
well, I think that with something that was kind of tapped into with Slappy and Skippy, and kind of a little bit infused into these segments was like having more of an emotional, developed story. In sense, like a lot of these were parodies of like musicals. They would have a lot of songs in them, so they were more reliant on story and more emotional beats. So I guess that's it makes it more unique because you knew you weren't just gonna get a lot of crazy, wacky comedy. You're gonna get some kind of like emotion out of it, and sometimes it was successful. I like the episode where it takes place during like the Nazi times. They have helped the girl get to the train. I really like that one. That one was really memorable, even though the animation sucked. And most of the time, the segments weren't all that like hilarious. But at least sometimes I remember some of the songs in them, even though they're usually just like parodies of other songs. Also, one weird thing is that the Goodfeathers intro, I really like the Goodfeathers intro for some reason, but it barely even like happened. Like even after they officially introduced it on one of the episodes, they just weren't using it a lot for some reason. But every Rita and Run segment since they introduced the intro had the intro, to my knowledge. So there's
Another,
really no reason for it.
the only other Reed and Run segment that I remember liking off the top of my head was the Halloween one called Frank and Run, where a doctor wants to steal Run's brain. I really like that one. And there's also, I think it's called Up a Tree, where Rita gets chased up a tree. The only reason I mentioned that one is because I like the songs in that one specifically. But those are the only ones that I really remember off the top of my head. And then we can't forget to mention the incredible Chicken Boo. And I do not have any idea why I like this segment so much because it's just the same thing happening over and over. But then seeing this and one of the horrible segments we're going to get to later is that there's actually kind of interesting sound of comedy and variation. And like with the Good Feathers, I think the reason I like it so much is because it's such a stupid, ridiculous concept of a giant chicken dressing up as a human for some reason and no one knowing, even though it's the most obvious disguise possible. And I still like
I think that
segments.
like the repetition of it, like the funniest part about any of these segments is the fact that they made so much of them. I don't think it was because they were good. It's just because that they were probably super easy to write. They just take Chicken Boo and someone just has an idea like what if he's a studio executive or what if he's in a western or like a
Or
crime
what if he
movie or
is
whatever.
apparently the sexiest man alive? Or some kind of studio executive or something.
I think that like
Or what
if
if
it
he's
if
hired in to punch up the script for the live action of Flintstones?
is that a real thing that
Yes,
happened?
that's an episode.
I
That's in
think that like
season
if
three,
it
I think.
was
If he makes his own TV network. I don't know if you mentioned that already with the TV executive.
if if it was just a random like a one-off segment that happened once or twice or like even three times, it wouldn't really be that funny. It would just be kind of annoying. But since they do it so much, that's just like the funniest part. You know exactly how it's going to end, and occasionally they get some good jokes in there. I remember the episode where he's like a TV executive or whatever coming in to punch up the script. I think that was the one that had a bunch of caricatures of the writers, and some of them I actually recognize the caricatures. I think Peter Hastings was caricatured in that one, or I'm thinking of that
I
pink in the
know
brain one.
Peter Hastings was there, Sherry Stoner was there. I don't know if Andrea Romano was there. I recognized their caricatures from Toon's Takeover. And yes, always they were
So
in
that
that
was something
also.
cool about that one. But usually there aren't really any specific jokes from Chicken Boo's segments that I remember.
But there
Besides
aren't
the
really
one,
any
besides
jokes.
the
It's basically just
one,
the same thing happening over and over, and that's the joke.
besides the one who's like a sumo wrestler or something, where the judge or the sensei karate chops himself out of the building. I remember that one, and there was the Christmas one. There was also a crossover with the Randy Beeman kid segment. They don't call him by that, but it's the same design, so I'm gonna assume it's supposed to be him. But Chicken Boo gets kicked out of the building, and then there's a surprise twist ending with Santa giving him a happy ending because it's the Christmas special. And I think that one was memorable. I mean, it wasn't like super hilarious or anything, but the Chicken Boo segments never are. Anyway, next, this isn't really. I'm gonna assume that this isn't going in like any
It's
order
not
of
going in any
goodness.
order.
Anyway, the next one we should talk about is like Buttons and Mindy, and by should I mean that I just thought about them.
Okay, so
The basic premise of these is that it's like a parody of Lassie. I'm assuming based on the intro of the segment, is that this baby keeps getting into trouble and she has neglective parents, and then the dog tries to
she's
save
not
the
really a
baby
baby.
and
She's more like a child.
oh
They
well,
don't say how old she is.
son of a mouse. Anyways,
Stop that! Please don't repeat that ever again. But
and this
anyways,
little girl and the
yeah.
dog tries to save the little girl, getting into all kinds of wacky antics because she has neglectful parents. And then usually, like the worst part of the segment that every fan hates, well, maybe that some people like it or whatever, is that Buttons the dog always gets punished by not having treats or whatever. And there's like usually it connects to the beginning where like the mom tells Buttons not to do something, and then he ends up accidentally doing it because he's trying to save Mindy from getting crushed in like a trash compactor or whatever happens. And it's just an awful ending every time, and I just kind of want. Obviously, technically, I guess these are better story wise than Chicken Boo because there's actually more of a story structure and there's like a setup at the beginning and payoff at the end of what's happening. So I guess technically these are better, but I don't really think that. I mean, I just really don't really like these that much. Later on in like the Kids WB era, they had more Buttons and Mindy, so they were actually like kind of better a little bit, and they had more variations on what was happening.
Well, I don't think they had. I think it just seemed like there were more because there were less episodes. But the only ones I remember was Night of Living Buttons, Buttons and Owls. Both of those ones I really liked. And there's one other one about. There's an Alice in Wonderland parody. Those are the only ones I remember off the top of my head, besides random cameos and stuff. But as for my appearance on segments, I think that the endings with Buns being berated would be like I think if they portrayed Buns as more of a bastard who only cared about getting food, and he's only saving Mindy for the food, then him getting great at the end would be just kind of well, I don't know if that would really work, but that would be better. Or if they didn't show him crying at the end of a lot of the segments, then it would
Also,
be better.
one really
But
awful.
also, with every Buns and Mindy segment, not everyone, but they basically just saddled with the low end studios of ACOM and freelance. So even though there's some of ACOM's better work, some of the slapstick just didn't land at all. Some of it just wasn't really that funny. And there's an episode, I don't remember what episode it was. I know I had a Buns in the segment, but there's an episode with an awful end credit sequence featuring Buns being in pain and then Mindy coming over and hugging it with him screaming and crying out for help. Which, first of all, that's not really. Buns actually likes Mindy, so I don't know why they're doing with this off-brand Elmira characterization or anything. So I don't know why. I don't know why they're doing that.
I think that was
But
I think that
second,
was
I
the
don't know why they would
caveman.
even.
I think that was the caveman episode, which doesn't fit because like you think they would. Well, first off, they just shouldn't have even made that in the
I think
beginning.
they made that as a parody of the Lassie end credits.
Well, I think they should have. Maybe they should have put that on like the first Buns and Mini episode. First episode with the Buns and Mini segment, so that way it connect directly to the intro, so you can more tell it's Lassie parody. But it's weird that they just tagged on this end credit sequence that wasn't in like the caveman style of the segment, and also didn't even have the same animation studio as the segment kind of thing.
It was TMS that animated the end credits part that I just mentioned.
Also, they animate the intro, but no actual segment besides an Animaniacs do, where they animate the Pink in the Brain Mindy crossover thing.
Well, anyway, even though the segments do have awful endings, I most of the time just don't really mind them that much because I'm not actively watching them. They're just kind of just on in the background while I kind of chuckle at some kind of clever visual gag or anything. But I think if they change the endings of these to be less mean towards buttons, I'd probably like these a lot more. But it just seems horrible. But the good thing with the Kids WB era is that they actually veered them up because by then they realized what worked and what didn't. So they knew that they couldn't just do the same exact thing every single time and just have Buttons just knocking anything at the end. I don't think Night of Living Buttons even has an end scene with Mindy's parents. It just kind of randomly ends with Michigan J. Frog just singing.
You know,
There's
you
really an
think,
ending.
I guess there being less segments allowed them more time to work on them, or they just randomly became better or something. But anyway, next segment. I think this might be the last segment, but it's the incredible, amazing Hip Hippos. I think these are like the last segment.
Well, there's also
Well, the
there's
last
also
like
Kidding
character
Boom. There's also Kidding Boom, but
gross,
discuss Hip Hippo source because there's like
disgusting.
literally nothing to talk about.
So basically, what it's about is that his joke is that they're upper class hippos, and you expect hippos to be gross and disgusting. These are actually upper class with like accents or whatever, and also they're super fat, and they have like two solo segments. I think there's one with like the brain randomly. Seems kind of weird how they just had a random crossover with the brain for some
It's not
reason.
even in the Animaniacs 2 episodes. It feels kind of out of place, but they're at least trying to do something different. I think there's like three in the first season. All of them just suck. There's one in the fourth season called Amazing Gladiators, which is actually pretty fun. And then I think the one you just mentioned with the brain, that was no,
Season
that was
five.
in one of the last two seasons. I know that, but
Some
that one just felt weird. Like they just had a random idea and they just had to make a segment, so they just did. They're basically just doing anything, which probably led to some of the weaker Warner segments in the fourth and fifth seasons, but also probably led to the two Buns and Mini segments I actually like. So beggars can't be choosers, I guess.
one thing.
I don't really hate the characters that much, but they don't really do anything funny. They're just mostly just there in the background when they make cameos. So actually, I don't really like the characters that much, but I don't really hate them either. So yeah, and
And some
there's a couple of them which are like kind of sort of decent, I guess, with this scientist lady, whatever she is, trying to hunt them down or track them or whatever she's doing. I mean, they're not really. I think Camp by a Throw was the least awful of them before Amazing Gladiators, but still not that not that really good and memorable.
I think they're better like in their little random little cameos. And there's one episode that's technically about them, which is the Hercule Wayako. I love that episode so much. And the episode is kind of about them, but they don't really have too many jokes about how fat and obese they are. So it's not just generic hip hippos things. Also, I think that
There's
episode
a
and most episodes that had them were before this segment premiered, and also the first segment that appears of them in the show has the intro for the segments, and then like the next segment with them explains the origin of them. So I don't really know what happened in the production. Also,
maybe they thought that one was better because usually when you make a show with 1,000 episodes, you want to push the better stuff towards the beginning.
well, I
So that
think
way, by the
that
time they make something that sucks, you're going to be confident of the quality to wait until next week when they make an actual funny episode.
well, I don't think that works with the hip hippos because there's only 3 segments in season one, and
Well,
they're also in the intro, which makes you think that they were like, and concerning that and the amount of cameos that they made, I think they were planned to be bigger characters because they're fat. Anyways,
stop, please stop.
I think
They also starred in Noah's Ark segment, which I didn't really hate it. There's some things that were like kind of funny, but also it just well, first one thing I found funny is that they just say I guess they could just say Nazi on kids television in the 90s,
most
but
primetime Fox Kids, well, not primetime,
also
but
they
whatever.
have some of the Bush people, whatever they call them, from Tasmania, making a little cameo with the Tasmania theme song in the back, and that was pretty cute. But the rest of it was kind of about the hip hippos, but also about Noah's Ark. There's a pretty funny Pig in the Brand cameo and Buster and Babs cameo in there. But that's basically like the only thing I really liked about it. Kind of start the hip hippos, but they're only in half of it. It's just one of the weirder segments.
Is the Noah's
Adding to the weirdness is that the three writers went by went by different names for the episode for some reason. It's very obvious that they are, but I don't know. I don't know why they even chose to do that. I guess to make something funny out of this episode.
So is that the note I will. I think I like the Noah that they have in that episode, mostly because of his voice, and I wanted. There's no other character that has like a voice like that in the show, so that's supposed to be like a parody of someone specific.
It's probably if the character has some kind of random voice that isn't an easily identifiable accent, it's probably a parody, like how Katie's dad is a parody of Jimmy Stewart for some reason. The only thing I like about this segment, by the way.
So, speaking of which,
Wait, to stall this even more, do we have to talk about Minerva making sure we had two segments?
we can do that at the end
Okay,
after the little mime time things, whatever, in other short segments.
Okay, you talk about Katie first.
Anyway, Katie Kaboom. It's basically amazingly hilarious, not at all sexist comedy of a teenage girl freaking out after having a problem, but this time it's super funny and hilarious because he turns into monsters, kind of like how they figuratively do, I'm assuming. So yeah, that's basically the joke. And
Yeah,
I think like the whole thing of these is that it's supposed to be like relatable to people who have teenagers at home, but this really probably isn't funny to like kids. Maybe if they have like an older sibling that has these kinds of freakouts, maybe it's funny to them. But I think it's more for like the parents and like the writers venting about their teenage daughters. That's basically like the whole joke of it. Also, not to mention that the animation sucked every single time it happened.
Speaking of every single time, literally every single one of the Katie Boom shorts, besides the crossover one with Chicken Boo, which is the best one.
It was also the first one, so I guess like with Animaniacs, it's really weird where it was placed because you didn't get any Katie Kaboom segments at that point. So you just basically introduced this new character randomly in what seemed like a one-off, but then you get basically most of her segments in season 2, which is already surrounded by a lot of mediocre stuff from even the regular good stuff.
I know she was in season 2 a couple times, but a lot of her segments like near the end of season 1, so you're just getting bombarded with garbage alongside the less good than usual segments that are in these episodes anyway. And plus, season 2 as a whole just kind of felt like a dumping ground for the stuff that didn't feel was good enough for the first season. But all of the segments of Katie Boom were written by the same person, Nicholas Hollander. So I guess he was the only one brave enough to conquer this incredibly funny concept. Deanna Oliver came up with Chicken Boo, and even she had help with some of the other ones, I guess, because... And I think she also came up with the Good Feathers as well, because she read a lot of their segments. But
I mean,
the other writers also contributed because there's some kind of comedy to be had with the characters. With Katie Boom, it was just the same thing over and over, except he turns into a different monster each time, which is pretty cool. It's kind of ruined by the most of the times awful ACOM and freelance animation that they got to do these. I think Wayne probably animated one, but at the point it was at the Kids Day Be Everywhere, the animation wasn't as good anyway, so it might as well have been those other studios. But with Katie Boom, I don't know why they made them the Kids Day Be era, because by that point they probably should have known to not do this. It was probably just some random one just laying around that they just forgot to make. And that's why they had it.
I think that you can tell
it's not really that it's... I think it would probably be funny if like once or two times not stretching it. But I think like the worst part of all is that they made so many of these. Like there isn't that much magic you even get. And it's just
also I like
it's just horrible. She doesn't even have any like kind of appearance in any segment outside of her own. So that proves
that that Chicken Boo crossover one.
Well, yeah,
maybe
like
that
one,
in
but
the background, like in the Rap Party one from season 3.
I think I don't like have every writer who wrote every episode memorized, but I think that the person who wrote that episode probably, if it wasn't Nicholas Hollander who created Katie Boom, but that's probably the only thing they could think of doing anything funny with a character by pairing her with another character. And since Chicken Boo is very easy to write, then they probably just did that.
Well, I mean, they didn't include every character as if it was their own segment. They didn't have the hip hippos as if it was their own segment. They had them cameo in other people's segments. So they didn't have to have a Katie Kaboom segment in there.
Also, the Katie Kaboom segment with Chicken Boo in that episode was animated by ACOM, unlike the rest of the episode, which is by TMS. They probably just put it in there because it fit the theme, because they couldn't find anywhere else to put it.
I think
but it's just weird how they didn't wait until like near the end of the season to place it where the characters will already be all established and stuff. But it just doesn't matter. The segments suck. That's basically like the beginning and end of it. Only thing I liked, as previously mentioned, is Katie's dad's Jimmy Stewart inspired voice provided by Val Paulson. I don't know why they even did that, but I guess it just
Also,
wanted
like
something, just something, anything to come out of this.
I like the intro. Well, the animation itself just kind of sucks, but the song itself I like tons.
Also,
It's just
they
yeah.
make cameos in Wacko's Wish. That's the only presence they have outside of their own segments is little cameos where I don't think any of them even talk.
So anyway, next is like little tiny little smaller stuff. Also, I wanted to say this probably before anything else, but I think that with season one, like you get a lot of good stuff, but also you get a lot of just stuff that isn't that great. I think that the problem back then with a lot of shows having 65 episode seasons ordered immediately, there's not really any like testing ground. There's not really any like testing phase. You just kind of have to figure it out as you go along, and you can't really see the specific improvements because these were just jumbled up in some random order. So you get something really good that could have been produced later on, or something really terrible from like earlier on when they didn't know how to write good. So you don't
And
really like know what people are going to respond to, and you can tell that by season three they could tell either that or Kids WB asked them to stop some of the other segments. So you can tell by how season three mostly focused on Slappy and the Warners that they enjoyed writing for them the most, or that's what people responded to the most.
also the Pinky the Brain spin-off show, which I guess meant they just stopped having Pinky the Brain on the show, basically entirely outside of random cameo appearances and one other segment in the fifth season. But another thing you can tell since the 65 episode first season, they didn't stop making the Hip Hippos because it wasn't popular, because they didn't have enough time to gauge that. They stopped making them because they couldn't really find anything to do with them. Unlike Chicken Fair Week, they could, even though a lot of people don't like those segments, but I guess they could just put them in random situations, and they didn't know that yet because they had to make 65 episodes before the show even aired. So, well, if you put it into the perspective of each individual like 7 minute segment, they actually had to make way more, and they probably don't know the way the episodes are going to be ordered and packaged and actually aired. So they just don't know. So it's actually even harder to gauge than Tiny Toons, which is made as just single episodes with the whole rav around and stuff. So it would be even harder to gauge the Animaniacs. They just judge it on whatever's popular with the crew, whichever ones the crew liked more and stuff.
And next, some of the smaller segments. One is Mime Time, where a mime mimes something and then he gets hurt. These ones are just, I don't even know like why they even made these. These are literally the literal definition of filler. And if it weren't for the animation by TMS, I think they did everyone, if not like almost everyone. If it wasn't for the always great animation by TMS, these wouldn't really be noteworthy or anything. Just kind of makes you feel bad for the mime, but he doesn't really get any kind of like actual emotions. So I mean, I guess you don't really feel too bad for him. And I think like the main impact made was, I think he made more of an impact on Wacko's Wish than in his own segments. I don't even know if he had crossover cameos with anyone else. And then there was good
Well,
idea.
before
Yeah.
I just want to say that the Mime Time segments, they weren't really that often, but they just appeared for like 10 seconds. Then they just disappeared. In season 2, there's like a whole entire marathon of them in like every episode. Well, that's like extreme exaggeration. But I know there were a lot of them. I did not know. I guess they just didn't like them and they just held them over for season 2. But
Are we going to discuss them season by season?
what?
Are we going to discuss the show season by season?
We were just talking about. You were just talking about by seasons 3 and 4, they knew what segments they wanted to keep. But I think by the fourth season, they were just doing whatever, which birthed the Hip Hippos and Brain crossover episode, and a couple of the other Buns and Mini segments, which I think were also
Probably what happened with that Hip Hippo's brain one, they probably thought of like some kind of premise of the Hip Hippos having a baby. But then they just thought that it would be funny if it would be brain, and then they just made that.
It's probably a Katie Kaboo situation that, like I mentioned earlier. But onto the good idea, bad idea segments. It's basically, well, it's kind of like Mime Time, but it's actually funny, where it shows this skullhead guy who originated on Tiny Toons doing something that makes sense, and then some kind of stupid pun or stupid joke. and him doing the same thing but a different situation or in a different way where it doesn't make sense at all. And then sometimes he gets hurt, or sometimes nothing happens. And since he's just a skullhead guy with no emotion and no real, like, any way to show an actual pain, then it's not as horrifying as the Mountain Time which weren't really that funny at all. But also, these are actually creative. There's one episode where they have like 8 of them in a row for some reason because I guess they just really want to force them out to the world.
And also, these ones were obviously animated by weaker studios, but I guess you don't need elaborate animations for such simple character design as the Skull guy. But speaking of which, there's an episode that starred him, Skullhead Bunny Hands, I'm pretty sure that was called. I think it's a parody of like Edward Scissorhands, and I've never seen like even a single second of that movie. So it just completely falls flat, and it's probably like one of the only time. Well, actually, it's pretty often that this happens, where they don't even attempt any kind of actual joke outside of it just being a parody of something. And since like the movie is probably like 100 minutes long or something, I don't even know. Since like a full feature length movie storyline cut down to like 7 minutes, and it's just like a basic story that don't really try to tell any jokes. With they don't even attempt. I mean, they kind of attempt some kind of story, but I'm assuming that the real movie has actual like emotional weight to the story, actual things happening. But here he's just taken in by some family, and then he gets buried in the yard, and then that's the end. There really isn't a joke because I've never seen the movie, but I'm assuming that maybe like kids back then snuck into their parents' room to watch the VHS tape of it or whatever they had back then.
Well,
So
kids back then probably didn't really know the concept of what a parody was, so they just saw funny antics happening.
the only like joke that I could think of being to this episode, unless there's like some witty subversion of the plot of the movie that I'm not getting, that the dog being named Dog, I think that's. I mean, it's not funny, but I can see that that's like a comedic thing. It's I don't know if it's like based on something in the movie, if it's just some dumb thing they thought of. But I can't tell. I can't even give them credit if they actually tried to make a joke because I don't know if it's supposed to be a reference or not, so I can't really give them any credit for it.
Yeah, so is that all I want to say about the Skullhead stuff.
Yeah, basically.
And
Also, I like the song that they put in that segment. I'm assuming that's based on the movie. Also, like probably like one of the
I'm talking about the part the Warner singing before
yeah.
and after. That's from Tiny Toons also.
Oh. Hmm.
And this might be the last one. I don't know, but the Randy Beeman kid segments. His name is. I don't think they ever. I don't think they ever call him Colin from the voice actor. I don't know if they ever call him that. But basically, all this kid does, he comes out of his house, probably doing something, and telling some kind of weird, stupid story about Randy Beeman, who we'd never see. It's not explained who he is. I don't even remember if they like describe anything about him. But basically, he just comes out, tells a stupid, weird, ridiculous story of Randy Beeman, and then he goes back inside of his house. But they don't really like try to be anything. They're not. They don't try to have some kind of grand sweeping story. It's just a kid telling a weird story while doing something, and then he leaves, and that's basically it. They didn't need to have Star Tunes to work on these, but I guess you have to give them doing some work. It doesn't require them as like actual animation or anything. But Star Tunes being on this just adds to the charm that I don't think TMS could have pulled off perfectly.
I think that part of this is that like having like hearing kids tell like ridiculous stories like these, also having a real child voice actor. This is basically like how a kid would tell these like weird stories, and sometimes they're like really weird and crazy. Sometimes they're just super mundane, but told in a very stretched out way, to the point where it becomes funnier than a really weird abstract story. I think the fact that they didn't really overuse these, like they used them like just the right amount to the point where I would actually like stop and pay attention to the screen if one of these comes up. Well, not to the point that I would do for like a Warner
Do you
segment or
think
whatever, but you know.
that the people who made the Animax reboot were inspired by this to make the Starbucks and Cindy segments? Because the girl in the segment basically just tells long, rambling on
Well,
stories.
I don't. Well, I'm pretty
Well, I mean,
sure
that
that
doesn't relate at all, but
I
I
think
just
that
kind
a
of
kid
thought,
telling long-winded, ridiculous stories is like a universal concept. I don't think that's something that Animaniacs invented. At least they didn't invent it to be told in this way in animation. Also, I'm pretty sure that the Starbucks and Cindy voice recordings like improvised by someone following someone around with a microphone. So I don't think they got it from this, but I mean it's possible that maybe someone on that team will actually watch the original, but I kind of doubt it. Hold on, gotta pee.
okay, bye. So, I guess you have to discuss whatever make to make this a true Animaniacs completioner's guide, retrospective, or whatever. She doesn't really have that good of a character. I liked, uh, the, I liked Meet Minerva, which is aired second. It was obviously meant to be first. I think that I only like that because of Newt, who makes like one other appearance, I think, and also because of Stark's animation. If it was handed over to ACOM, like ACOM's animation on Minerva is pretty decent, but and that's
Is
basically
that the
like,
one
the
with the
best thing
Falmouth
about it.
cameo?
The Falmouth cameo is in Meet Minerva, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, there wasn't really that much to talk about with the. Like the but now since we're at the end, which one of the characters, or which like group of characters, whatever characters, which one of them is your favorite and least favorite?
Well, my favorite segments like the Warners and Pink in the Brain. Actually, I think it would be Warners or Slappy in like first or second, and then Pink in the Brain and Good Feathers. I think I like Good Feathers more than Pink in the Brain, but I think well, I mean, it's like Warner's, Slappy, Pink in the Brain, and Good Feathers. Um, Warner's or Slappy, Squirrel, Fish or second. Good Feathers are before Pink in the Brain. But those are usually like if I think about a specific segment or line from a segment, it'd usually be from there, from one of those segments.
Oh, my favorite specific characters. I really like Wacko. I like Doctor Scratch and stuff. I don't think I like. Well, as previously mentioned, I don't really like the Katie Boom characters. Besides the dad, well, they don't even have any presence in anime. Actually, they basically just don't exist. I don't really like the Hippos that much. I like the Good Feathers. They're sometimes more impression as time gets, but I like the Good Feathers characters themselves. I like Pink and the Brand. Slappy and Skipper's relationship was great. My favorite one out of the Warners would probably be Wacko for some reason. I don't know why I like him specifically, but I just really like him. I think it's because the reboot made me like him the most. So that's like 1 point for the reboot. Oh, I
Yeah.
also I also like Doctor Strange stuff.
What kind of accent does he have?
It's a kind of European, vaguely Austrian German style accent, I guess.
I think that sometimes, well, this is mostly because of the accent. I think that sometimes the way he pronounces like certain words is funny, even if the line itself isn't funny. And I want to know if that was like the mispronunciations were like in the script or like improvised. They're
Well,
more
the
likely to
accent
be in the
does
script.
seem to be very specific, so it probably was like specifically directed, and maybe it wasn't a script or not. And speaking of Scratch and Sniff, let's go on to favorite episodes. And the reason I mentioned him specifically is because outside of the ones I already mentioned, La La La, I think that's what the episode's called. But that's the episode where Scratch Sniff has the parking ticket and the Warners defend him in court. I really like that one. The animation by TMS is some of their best work in all of Western cartoon outsourcing history, in my opinion. But I really like that one. It's really funny. I remember liking Drive Insane when I watched it last time. I don't know if I like it that much in retrospect, but I remember laughing at it when I watched it. There's one of them called Anchors and Warners in season 4, which I didn't really like that much. The ACOM animation was not that good. But also, they took the scratch and sniff torture just too far. He wasn't even like bothering or really interacting with the Warners in every way. It just wasn't really that funny. The Warners were just more being annoying and not really doing the usual cartoon slapstick goofy antics they were doing. And Scratch and Sniff, and even though this kind of happened in Drive Insane, Scratch and Sniff did sometimes make himself look like a complete idiot with that ridiculous toupee and giving raspberries to everyone. So it kind of made this stuff funny, but in Anchors and Warners, it just wasn't really. and that funny. It was just miserable like the whole time, and it doesn't even have a good ending. And Anchor's Warner's. So yeah, and other least favorite segments, you could basically least favorite like specific shorts. You could basically just put most of them that just rely on random references, or ones that just feel stale, like most of the Warner segments, season 4 and 5. The James Bond parody one from Burbank with Love, I think was called. That one was really good. Most of the other season 4 and 5 Warner segments just aren't that good. Like Papers for Papa, I don't know if you remember that one. It's just so forgettable. It's not like it's entirely unfunny or worthless. It just kind of feels like a stale, safe one, but it's just like not very memorable. But yeah. Anything else you want to discuss before we move on? Any
One
specific least
thing
favorite
that
shorts or
was
anything?
one thing that was interesting, probably not like maybe it was good, maybe it was bad kind of thing. They did a lot of like random one-off ideas. Also, we completely forgot the incredibly memorable The Flame, which had three
Oh
segments, and it
yeah,
was
it's
basically just
Steven
like
Spielberg's favorite segment. The second one is the
what
best. No, the second one is in season. It's one of the ones I think in the Kids WB era. But I liked one of those ones. It was by Wang. I'm pretty sure. And no, it was the last one. I didn't like that much. It seemed like a horrible rehash of that third one. I think it was the one. I know it was the one before the last one. That premiere, I liked that one. But the first two was just a waste of TMS. I know TMS did the first one, but
well,
I
there's some
know
great
Sword did the
TMS
second.
animation, and one of Tom Ruger's sons, I forgot which one, did the voice of Flame, and that's pretty cute. But it's basically just like The Flame recounting like famous historical event as a way of education to teach kids this cute little Flame character. But like that's basically like the whole thing of these segments.
They weren't really that funny besides one joke that they did in the first one, which is only funny that kind of funny that first time, where the Flame was talking about there being a fire and that they need to put it out, only for him to realize comedically that he's the fire. If the voice performance is a little better, it would be actually funny.
It was
But
probably
I
like
guess
eight
if,
when he did that.
oh, it still sucks. Anyway, some of the one-off ones they did, I don't really remember. I kind of like the Brave Little Trailer one, but that was probably mostly because of the TMS animation and not because it was actually funny. I did like the ending with the trailer and the other little vehicle, whatever they call that thing, with them being friends at the end. I like that part at the end. It's revealed that
I
it's the
think with
trailer
like
being the
some of
whole tug
these,
story. But some of the other one-off ones I didn't like
there
that much.
was
Like the one with
one.
the fly and the horribly designed girl fly butterfly with a whatever the heck that was, and the one about the wrapping paper. That one is decent.
Like the
But those
cameo
are
with the One Druggy Evening homeless guy. I don't
and also
really
the Buns and Mindy cameo, and Buns doesn't get tortured randomly. So that's a pretty good part of that one.
something I really like. You
And
just brought it up.
the one-off one with Bird believing the bomb was its mother. It could have been funny, but it just went on way too long. Even though it was only like 7 minutes long.
Also, the ending wasn't even funny. Like they had an opportunity to have a funny ending, then they just kind of undercut it by just having
I
it go
think
on
they
a little
wanted
bit
to.
longer, and then it just ended like normally without any funny punchline or anything.
I think they were more focused on making these one-off segments cute rather than them being funny. Especially considering
I guess it's a
how that
callback to.
cartoon with the bird believing the bomb was his mother was once again voiced by one of Tom Ruger's sons. I think it's the same one. I think it's the same one of Tom Ruger's sons that voiced the flame, and they focused more on making it cute rather than funny, and they can't really have the bird go through slapstick antics because it's basically like a kid going through slapstick antics, and that's just not funny. So I think they wanted to focus more on making it cute, but they just sucked all of the possible comedy out of it, but decided to just not really
Also,
do that
there's
much
one
besides the
about
basic
like.
concept that isn't really that funny, and they don't exaggerate it enough to be funny. So it's basically just not really anything at all.
And also, there was one about like a bird and a cuckoo clock or something. I didn't even know what the actual story was. But it was about like a bird, like two birds, and maybe one of them was in like a cuckoo clock. He was trying to get to the bird in the cage or something. I don't really remember that one, besides the fact that I don't really like that much. Anyway, something that you mentioned earlier with like little cameos and things. Now, maybe
What,
these ones,
what one?
this is completely unrelated to what I was just about to say. But these ones kind of remind me of how, like in like some of the early Looney Tunes, they were focused more just being cute little distraction things instead of actually, making them funny. So maybe it was like intentionally homaging that. But I
Why
couldn't
they
really think.
intentionally homage is what's
And
supposed to be a
maybe
comedy show. Why they intentionally homage something that's not supposed to be funny, unless that's supposed to be a joke about how unfunny it is.
and bring up that, and also like the 65th episode where they make fun of how awful Buddy was. I think that in Tiny Toons they have, like, when they reference the old Looney Tunes characters, they have more of a respect for them because it's supposed to be like the second like generation. So they have more respect for the old characters. But in Animaniacs, specifically in the episode Buddy, they basically just talk about how shitty it was. But that's basically only in regards to Buddy. And I'm pretty sure that the crew who made this still do love and respect the old cartoons. But I don't think you would get anything such a scathing criticism of how awful the Buddy Shorts was. I don't think you would get that in Tiny Toons. So they're trying to be more respectful to the old stuff, I
Well,
guess.
Tiny. Well, maybe you would get that because, well, based on the Bosco episode, where they redesigned the character because the original Bosco character had some awful blackface stereotypes like embedded in it. But also they tried to act like the Bosco cartoons were as funny and as loony as later ones, and really they weren't. They're just trying to fabricate a random story. And it wasn't 1990. The internet wasn't that good yet, so no one would have like the knowledge to look it up to see if it was true or not. Well, obviously it isn't. If the episode is still good and has some of Kennedy cartoons better animation, so the episode is still good if you ignore the fact that basically the whole reason for it even existing is just not true at all. And I guess they just decided to actively make these changes. It was 1990, and I'm assuming they were huge fans, so they probably had some of the Jerry Beck written history books or whatever existed back then. So they obviously knew about the characters, but you know.
I think that something that you mentioned was what I was gonna say earlier, but like Buttons and Mindy cameo that Rapping People short. Is that you could have random cameos from random other characters in the short, and they don't really like. Besides the Warners, like run through the segments occasionally to play the theme song. But other than that, they usually don't really call attention to the cameos. They usually just very random, kind of like in the background. Sometimes they make a little joke of it. But that's one of like the best things about this. And they have like the characters cameo a bunch of times in other segments. It just kind of makes it feel more cohesive without an actual theme tying it together like you would have on Tiny Toons. And I think that like some of the characters, like the Hip Hippos or like Minerva Mink or whatever, I think they shine more in these like cameo ensemble roles and in their own segments.
So that's probably why they decided they wouldn't be that much of them because even though they're like kind of like on the lowest possible end of the characters, they still have some kind of like thing. I guess that they could like write like a two lines for them, a crossover segment, and they'd be like perfectly satisfied with them just existing in that format, rather than in their own weak segments.
Okay, so since we talked a lot about like the pop culture references in Tiny Toons, I think we should talk about a little bit about on Animaniacs. And sometimes it would get really egregious with the references to the point where there's just like a whole 15-second sequences of nothing but references. And sometimes like there was the episode with like the Godfather guy parody him being fat and it's like an Italian restaurant or whatever. I forgot what the episode was even called.
Are you talking about the episode with him cameoing and chairman of the board, or are you talking about the episode with the one is also in the restaurant
The
and
one
they're
with them
still
in the restaurant.
that's mobster mash?
So I basically I know the character more for like pop culture and parody, so I kind of get that. But I think like Chairman of the Board is the one I was thinking about. There's like a 15-second section of just nothing but cameos, and that's basically the whole joke. Besides the one with the guy being fat and ordering a bunch of food.
Well, a guy being fat, ordering a bunch of food, and falling and crashing through the ground is funny. It's not, but well, maybe it'd be funny if you knew the celebrity. It's funny to me because people being fat and falling through floors is just automatically funny by default. So it's funnier when they make the pop culture reference a character in itself. Like you don't have to know who Jerry Lewis is to find Mr. Director slash Mr. Clown, or whatever he goes by. But you don't have to know who Jerry Lewis is to find the character funny because the character is just so exaggerated that it doesn't really matter that much. Like I can't think of any specific examples, but there are probably some examples in the old Looney Tunes shorts There's a character that's a parody of some kind of celebrity or famous character, but it's just so exaggerated and just ridiculous that you don't really know it's a parody.
I
You find
think
it funny.
like something that I think about in regards to that is Racketeer Rabbit. I think that's what it's called, like the gangster. I'm pretty sure I've seen like some kind of character like that in other shorts. I don't know who that's supposed to be a parody of.
Edward G. Robinson.
Oh,
And also, Peter Lorre is a great example of that because it's parodied across all types of media, and a lot of people probably don't even know who that even is parodying or who it is even supposed to be. But he appears in a lot of Looney Tunes shorts, and the character is just so hideous and exaggerated that it's just so off-putting to someone who doesn't even know it's a reference that it becomes kind of interesting and funny, even if you don't know who it is, because it's just so weird looking.
and one of the most memorable episodes is Video Review, which basically just like those old 30s and 40s shorts of the Looney Tunes where like posters and advertisements and books come to life in the middle of the night and they do gags that are very of their time, very dated.
And also very corny.
Basically just a bunch of crappy, awful puns based on the slogans of the time and like references of the time. And yeah, and like something like book review is incredibly dated because no one even reads books anymore. But with video review, it just so happened that it existed right at the right time where VHS was coming in and like people watching TV all the time. So these films, well, most of the stuff they referenced got so overexposed back then that now people are still referencing it and talking about it today. And I feel like that if they tried to do something like this on a cartoon like earlier, well, I mean, the animation boom like the 80s and 90s, well, actually just the 90s, basically. I don't think that they would have even allowed it for something like this to even exist in the 80s. But if they did, in like the 70s or 80s, it probably wouldn't really be that good today because like it didn't really have a lot of pop culture outlets, or at least not as many as you did in the 90s.
Speaking of that video review episode, all the references and stuff, there's an episode, it's one of the very early episodes. It was obviously very early in production, as you can tell. It's one of the first few that were aired. It's called, I literally forgot, Taming of the Screwy. I really like the
Which one was
first
that?
half. That's the episode where the Warners are invited to I don't know if they're invited to it, but basically Mr. Plot's having this party with some Japanese investors, and
Yeah.
Plotz wants Scratch Sniff to keep the Warners under control. And I like the parts with the Warners and Scratch and Sniff. Even with the TMS animation, it's obviously very early and isn't as good as the later work. The second half is basically just a bunch of random references, including references to Wayne's World and Whoopi Goldberg being there randomly. There's a Terminator reference that I just didn't understand at all. The Thelma and Louise reference I liked. There's a random Steve Urkel cameo for no reason. And I also like the joke with Beauty and the Beast, with Belle and the Beast little cameo thing. I like that part. There's obviously just a bunch of references, and it's basically like the Titans Christmas episode, which, as I mentioned earlier, sucked because it was basically just a lot of references. The Starkins animation was weak itself, but basically, like all of that Titans Christmas episode was basically It's a Wonderful Life. The story was very poorly executed, and they spent more time making random references than actually making a good story. They randomly have a reference. I think there's a part in the Titans Chris episode where they have a reference to Hook with Robin Williams and Hook for no reason, which I might be confused with Boston Buzz Go Hawaiian, but chances are that reference in both episodes. And I think there's a Jimmy Stewart Rabbit character in the Titans Chris episode. I like that part also, like in Animaniacs. But a lot of it was just random references and very weak stuff in animation. Doesn't really help that much.
I think there could be an interesting case as to why like stuff from the 80s and 90s is talked about more today, while stuff from like the 60s and 70s isn't really. I mean, there's some
What?
there's some stuff from like the 60s and 70s or whatever that's talked about, but not as much like the 80s and 90s. I think it'd be interesting to see because you basically like with some of the kinds of anime next, you basically get all of 80s and 90s culture, at least a lot of it, in terms of like movies and TV, condensed into one show, like the attitudes of the time, in the same way that the old Looney Tunes shorts were. So I guess it's good. Like I get most of the jokes in video reviews. Some of them like specific to movies at the time, and sometimes I just get them. I could just assume that based on the names of the video, what it's about. But some of them I just don't understand. I'm assuming it's supposed to be like some very specific joke.
So
But most of the time, the jokes are just super corny and terrible puns based on the names. So you don't have to know the movie. Most of you just have to know what the name of it says on the VHS to get the awful joke.
the video view song itself is one of my favorites in the show. I think I don't know why. I think it's just because they make all these just random comparisons with the titles of the movies and like very vague comparisons with maybe the plot. I don't know. I just really like it. And before we end this anime discussion, what's your opinion on Wacko's Wish?
I rewatched it like it was like quite a bit ago. It was almost a year ago. I remember like when I first watched it, the first couple times I watched it, I didn't like it. I think because it focused more on like story instead of having like wacky slaps antics. But it was a full movie, so I don't know how they could have done a full 80-minute movie of wacky slapstick antics. I think that was some kind of story. But I think that it seems like it was kind of trying to be a finale with some of the characters getting some kind of send off, but also kind of like how Animaniacs has a lot of episodes where they mess around different time periods and there's really no kind of continuity, and always aware that they're in some kind of fake scenario. But here, to have it played straight for the movie just seems kind of weird and out of character for the show. So there's not really as much room for jokes, but the animation is good, and the songs are really good. And obviously the voice acting is good, and like there's some really great jokes. But overall, it's just I think the story, like the focus on story, kind of brings it down. I feel like that when they try to insert jokes into the serious moments, like the running gag about those acting classes or whatever, and what the actual surgery was needed for in the end, really just stupid jokes like that would have fit well in the series had they been treating it as a farce the whole time, just fall flat because they weren't treating it as a farce the whole time, and they kind of expect you to care about it, considering all the time they spend the exposition of the story. So I think that it focused too much on story and not enough on comedy. I think that everything besides the actual story itself was good. So it's just kind of like a
Well, I don't know if you call it the opposite, but he actually liked the concept of the movie. I actually liked the more emotional story, and he also liked the concept of all the characters chasing after the wishing star. But like most of the stuff with the king, I don't really care about. The last 20 minutes is basically like kind of lazy feeling highlight reel of all the old jokes, including the that the guy from the second Jerry Lewis episode with him being fat and talking about Dot's cute weirdness. I don't know if that's supposed to be a parody of someone or what the character's even called. They use him a couple of other times and not as many ways,
they
including
referenced him
in the brain.
in the Pink and the spin-off show. They referenced Dennis Hopper, so maybe it's like a parody of one of his characters or something.
Well, I don't even know who the character. I don't know. I think it's supposed to be pretty, but in that first appearance, it was Hearts of Twilight. So I'm just gonna call him the Hearts of Twilight guy. But in
I
that,
think it's called Mr. Crazy Person officially.
well, whoever he is, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? But whoever he is, that first appearance, that was basically the only time his appearance actually worked. I think the only times he appeared again was in a Pink in the Brain episode in season 4 or 5 segment Cute First Ask Questions Later, which sucked by the way. And then in Wacko's Wish, where it doesn't really work as well because it's like a whole entire string of highlight reels with Baloney and Mr. Director making random cameos. And
Also,
it's
the
basically like them
iconic
just reusing.
restroom from the Potty Emergency that was
Yeah,
covered in roaches.
that was also one of my favorite episodes. It's basically like them doing a highlight reel for like the last 20 minutes, and they try to do like some kind of emotional moment, which I thought they were gonna do a joke about it not being an emotional moment, just kind of like a forced joke or them turning around and make it so over dramatic and just ridiculous that turns out to be funny. They've actually been genuine with this, and that just doesn't really feel right. For One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that was fine because that episode was actually pretty funny. If a bit like weird for Animaniacs, but
I think
for
that the
Wacker's Wish, I think
difference.
that the over emotionalness just kind of ruined it. It kind of like I kind of like the more emotional story, but the emotional moments just don't really hit right. And they basically abandon the madman world concept. Basically, like abandon that for like the second half of the movie. But
I think
yeah,
the difference with this in comparison to Cuckoo Clock, whatever it is, I think the difference is that like the foundation of the relationship between Slappy and Skippy is already there. It's already baked in with the characters, so you don't need to have much. You don't really need to have much beyond the basic relationship to make the story effective. But with this, they have to make, since the Animaniacs like themselves, they basically just comedic characters, so they have to invent a whole world, a whole backstory of just a bunch of nonsense getting thrown at you, and then they expect you to immediately care about the story, and they kind of have to overcompensate by having so much story and emotional moments to have to try to get you to care about these versions of the characters to the point where it just kind of becomes overwhelming. You don't get enough time to actually have jokes.
so what are your thoughts on the movie?
Uh, well, yeah, on the movie, but I think I had something I was going to say about the series, but I'll probably just remember it. I'll probably
Well,
remember
I
it
don't
at
know if
some
you're gonna
point.
record like a, it's kind of like extra section after you record all this stuff to mention stuff we forgot to mention. But
Well,
since
we're
you're
gonna
talking
do.
about the Animaniacs movie, we did mention the Titans movie or specials. I don't know if you've seen the specials.
I've
I'm
seen
pretty
them at
sure
some
you've
point.
seen the movie. As for the movie, it is basically the Titans High School Vacation movie. It has a bunch. It's not really. It feels like a bunch of separate shorts that they had, that they basically just string together in a series of sequences, where it's basically just the Titans characters going on summer vacation. It's actually a pretty fun movie. It's basically an extended Titans episode. It does kind of have a bunch of, well, actually, I don't think it's as played by the pop culture references of the other ones. I think they're more focused on funny situations and funny jokes and stuff. Amazingly animated by TMS, but I think they're more focused on the funny situations rather than it just being a reference. I'm pretty sure the side plot, the Boston backside plot, is a reference to some movie, but it still works enough on its own that you don't need to know that. Also, from what I've heard, the movie is extremely disturbing and probably shouldn't even be referenced in a show made for kids. But
What
whatever.
movie?
I forgot what the movie was called. I think it involves like cannibalism or something. I don't know.
What?
Anyways, the Spring Break special I really like. It has some of the best Wang animation. It is kind of dragged down by the amount of random references they have. It's just filled with references. The guy that Elmira hangs around with, I don't know if he's a reverend or not. He probably is, but he's pretty funny because, like previously mentioned with Jerry Lewis, they over-exaggerate the character enough so that way it just feels like a stupid stereotype of a pre-existing character. But it is dragged down by the random music videos that they have. I don't know why they have these. Uh, they just had them in there. None of the songs are really that good besides the Elmira, I'll Be Chasing After You song. I found that pretty funny. And also the part where Elmira almost starts singing and then one of the security guys just throws her into the river and he just doesn't care whether or not she lives. He just throws her down there. And I found that funny. But the part near the end, we're just waiting for the build up for Plucky to be captured by Amari, just waiting for the build up. It takes way too long, and also Plucky just gets fucked over at the end of every one of these. Well, I don't know if Night Ghoulie really counts because that's not like a whole special, it's a series of stories. But it doesn't really get it. You know, House Man Vacation, it wasn't as mean, but in this one, it's just horrible. But at least Hampton gets a good ending in all of these, so that's pretty cool because I like Hampton. Night Ghoulie is just Night Ghoulie has amazing animation by TMS, and it's basically just it's a parody of an old TV show. You don't really need it called Night Gallery, I think is what it's called. But you don't really need to know that because there's basically just an anthology series of Halloween-esque related kind of stories, and it really works for because basically a lot of Titans humor comes from parodies and stuff, which a lot of this is, but it still really works because none of this is really supposed to make sense. It's basically supposed to be like an anthology, so you automatically expect some stuff to just not really make that much sense. But still, it's pretty funny and it's a great Halloween special. And your take?
I remember the vacation one. I've seen Night Ghoulie and Spring Break, but I don't remember that much about them. I'm gonna I basically just share your opinion on them as I remember it. And one thing that I forgot about that I want to mention on Animaniacs. Oh yeah, my least favorite segments are these awful Grey Macaroni segments,
Oh
where it's
yeah.
just four awful segments. Well, actually,
Uh,
all like the fourth one is fine, but like it's three awful segments, which is 4 minutes of wacko doing synthesized burps of classical music, with just animation that I guess the animation itself is good, but the expressions are so gross that I don't want to even look at it to appreciate it. And these segments all have written by in quotes credits by Tom Roker. I don't really know what was written. There's some little gags in between them that are kind of like reused between them. But in the fourth one, they do a little twist. I think it's like the Christmas special or something. They do a little twist on him having him making fart noises with his hands, which I guess isn't as horrific and gross. But I just kind of want to know like what they were thinking. This is like the literal definition of filler, and I just don't. I mean, at least Animaniacs didn't really try to pretend it was high art. Besides, I guess like the Back in Style episode where they parodied like Hanna-Barbera Filmation. Maybe they're kind of like punching down at like cheap studios, but I mean they
that
didn't really.
episode was animated by Acom, which is a cheap studio. So
Well, it didn't really seem like they were trying to like make themselves seem like they were like the best show ever with those. So I guess, but I mean
those great
this.
Macaroni segments with wacko Burbank making horrific faces is basically like the type of horrible, annoying show that the horrible looking promos make the show seem filled to the brim with just sound effects and characters and fast editing and just annoying things just happening. There's a promo with Yakko singing. I don't know if it's even the actual voice actor. And basically every one of the promos is annoying and just makes the show look horrible. But this one, I found a video of it that's called Craving. That's what the promo is called. Has Yakko singing super fast. It's filled to the brim with visuals and just noise and animation and characters and sound effects, including a clip from one of the Great Wacky Body segments. So the promos just made the show look just so horrible and annoying. And the Great Rocky is probably what people think of. They think the show is just horrible, annoying, spewing pop culture references and burp and fart sound effects. And none of the other, well, I can't think of any other example off the top of my head from Titans or Animaniacs that delved into having random gross out humor for literally no reason. Especially considering how the joke is just wacko making gross faces while burping the classical music, which just is just stupid. Like, how are there three of these? Made by Tom Wheeler himself. So this is like the vision. This is what he wants people to remember Animaniacs for.
Well, probably not. And another thing is that like there's a kind of a quality decline in seasons 4 and 5. And like with season 1, there was a lot of like obviously you can have the best episodes in season 1 because it's most of the series. There's a lot of good, but also a lot of just like mediocre or just like crappy ones in season 2, which was only 4 episodes long in comparison to season 165, because it got picked up by Kids WB, and I guess instead of just producing episodes the whole time, Kids WB wanted their own fresh, brand new season. So if they kept going with Fox Kids for a little more time, they probably would have ended up doing a whole 13 episodes. So like season 2 was just filled. Most segments were just mediocre. There was like the one with like the giant or troll, whatever it was, in the Warners in season 2. That one was like the most memorable one. But even like the Good Feathers segments were just kind of mediocre. There wasn't any like Peak in the Brain from my memory. Most like the mainstay segments are gone, and like a lot of it was just B tier filler segments that we started to get at the end of season
I'm
1
probably like C tier actually.
that end up bleeding into season 2, which makes season 2 overall a very unsatisfying season. And maybe if we got a full 13 episode season, it would have been better to have these segments more spread out. But then season 3 had 13 episodes, and most of the episodes were just the Warners or Slappy because Pink of the Ring got picked up at this time. So yeah,
With
the
the
animation
Warner,
was still good, and like it was mostly still good. Though you could there was still some kind of monotony with it just being the same characters, but they're great characters, so it didn't really matter that much.
well, the sloppy segments were obviously weaker than before, but the third season did have Gimme a Break, which is pretty good. I don't think any of them, at least not yet, were outright bad, but it did get kind of monotonous just seeing the Warners and Sloppy, like how in the reboot, it's just the Warners and Pink and the brand over and over.
I think that with like any of the characters, even if the idea of a whole entire Goodfeather show sounds great because those segments are great, but I think the best thing about them is that they're spread out in between all these other kinds of cycles with different kinds of humor and stuff. Even like a show with just the Warners or just Slappy, as good as the segments are, wouldn't be as great because you don't get to appreciate them as much if they're all together. And then season 4 and 5, they're basically just like the same season. You can see the animation get worse and the writing ended up getting worse, and basically just everything got worse
I
besides
don't
like the main
really
characters.
remember that much about season 4. Season 5 did give us the Macarena parody, the Macadamia Nut, which was my favorite segments of the whole show. And the finale, the Animaniacs suite, is pretty good. Season 5 did also give us the two-part movie thing, Hooray for North Hollywood. It had animation by Wang, but it was like season 5 Wang, so it was below substandard quality. And the plot just it was just so overly long and drawn out. Part 1 is pretty decent, but part 2 just wasn't that good. There's a random song scene called LA Dot, which had nothing to do with anything. I think the song's just there to pad out the runtime. The only thing that I liked was that Space Jam parody called Jamalot, which is just so stupid and just ridiculous. And I think, and I don't know if I'm thinking of another episode. I'm probably thinking of Back in Style or the 6th anniversary special with Chicken Boo making a movie or something. I think it was Back in Style that I'm thinking of, but
But which season gave us back in style? Was
that was
this,
season 5 also.
so they kind of had a mix of quality. Also, they did a random rehash of Variety Speak, just like a lot worse and randomly
With
for no
worse
reason.
animation by the same studio, and also just with no real reason.
Also, they had random scenes with the Goodfellas, which they just had a bunch of stuff to pad out time. Like this story could possibly fill just a regular 22-minute episode, but they just stretched out the two parts for no reason. And apparently, this was supposed to be like actual feature film at some point, so maybe they felt they needed to have some kind of fulfillment of that by making it two parts. But I would have just rather it just be 20 minutes if it meant it being better rather than it just being longer
The
for no
Good Feather
reason.
stuff that I previously mentioned is incredibly obviously animated by a different studio, and then one of those segments that looks like it's probably going to be like a series of segments, one episode. They just put some of them in Hooray for North Hollywood Part 1, and then the final one is in the very final episode of the series. And speaking of things animated by a different studio, they insert in a random song sequence. The song is pretty good, and but then it's obviously just not meant to be here because it's animated by Star Tunes, and instead of below substandard Wing. Star Tunes animation is pretty good. The song's pretty good, but it just has no reason. They barely even transition to it with very incredibly obviously dubbed after it was animated dialogue of them randomly singing for no reason. So obviously you just have to stretch the paths out as long as possible, and it just doesn't really work at all. What were they even like trying to attempt?
And something that I don't like, well, I don't even know if it was even that common, but Animaniacs in like seasons 4 and 5, maybe they did this sometimes earlier on, but they started doing more like Disney parodies specifically. I know that in like season 1, I'm gonna assume it was season 1, Bumby's mom was specifically
That was season one.
specifically a parody on Bambi and how it traumatized children. Well, the series took place in the 90s. I don't know how they're watching it in the theaters. Maybe there's like a re-release or
Well,
something.
it was based on. I think it was based on a based on a childhood experience, some kind of real life experience, or
And it's
something
basically a
or other.
story about how Bambi traumatized children. I think that episode was really good, showcasing Slap and Skip's relationship, and also really funny. But then later on, we just got seeing these really low effort, lazy parodies, like the Pocahontas one and the Beauty and the Beast one was like, well, I mean, it was fine. Like I like that there was Taz instead of the Beast, but that's probably like the best part about it. Also, the animation was good, and I like the
Also,
songs, I guess. But some parts of that just weren't really that funny, and I feel like that a lot of it was just like the characters arguing, and it just wasn't like entertaining at all. Also, that one, I think that was cute for us to ask questions later. I don't know if that was supposed to be like a specific Disney parody, but just kind of seemed like it was supposed to be. I don't really remember it that
well,
well.
Q first asked questions later was about the Snow White mirror from Snow White, declaring it's not. It doesn't look like it's supposed to be the one from Disney movie, but it is Snow White, and that's mostly associated with Disney. The animation is horrible, as previously mentioned, but basically the plot is that the Snow White mirror from Snow White declares Dot to be the cutest in all the land, and then Snow White gets pissed at her and tries to get the doors to kidnap her, and then Yak and Wakago to stop her. It's not as funny as it sounds. It's actually not funny at all, actually. It just feels like very low effort, low comedy. There's a Friends parody episode, which I've never even seen Friends, don't know anything about it. So the episode wasn't really that interesting, but it was animated by the greatly named studio of Philippine animation, whatever the hell, Philippines Animation Studio, I think it's called. They only made this episode, and it looks very off, but I imagine if they were contracted to do more episodes, then they would have done better about it. The episode isn't really that funny to me because I know nothing about Friends. I did laugh at the random Seinfeld parody at the end. But the episode just wasn't really that funny to me. It feels more like it's trying to bank on you knowing what Friends is, rather than actually trying to be funny or anything.
And like with like the first three seasons, the first three seasons would never do this.
Stop. You can just make random specific references like this.
Anyways, they're more banking on like they had in like seasons 4 and 5, and maybe they had this sometimes in the earlier seasons, but more in seasons 4 and 5. We had whole segments basically dedicated to being parodies and references where you had to have seen a specific movie or show or whatever, but they're more like evenly sprinkled throughout, like 10-second gags in the earlier episodes.
What? Do you have a post?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
And there's even like there's one part of the Pocahontas parody episode where I think it's talking about like franchising like a sequel or something, which is literally the most basic, bare bones Disney commentary you could possibly make about how they're a greedy, money hungry company.
And
Obviously,
that was all
that
the way
might have
back
been
in
like
that was all the way back in like 1997 and 98. So that's just the most cheap. Get it cheap because it's about money. Because that's just the
uh,
most cheap standard joke you can make. There was one joke in that Pocahontas episode I found funny, with Slappy's cameo and her complaining about her not being paid or whatever, and her talking about her not wanting to sing. Slappy's like the only funny part of the episode. But
there's a
also,
really
and
weird part.
even you can tell even in season 3, which is obviously the first one that was to be written after the show premiere, but they relied a lot more on references. Even though the Beatles reference episode and the Power Rangers episode, even though I liked those ones, there was obviously it was leaning more on references to specific things than rather than references to things as a whole. It's just like not basically a whole entire episode about reference.
And
Usually
I
it's
think
like a
it's
quick
really
gag.
funny that they started out the Kids WB season by mocking Power Rangers, which was on Fox Kids, their old network. I don't know if that was like a part of why they got kicked off Fox Kids, or maybe it was because the Kids WB they wanted something to bank on their own network because they saw how popular Fox Kids was getting. So Warner Bros. Wanted their own shows, and they didn't want someone else getting profit off their
Well,
own
Warner Bros.
shows.
didn't want their own shows because the reason that the Animaniacs was canceled is because they wanted less episodes. Because Pokemon was introduced into the States and Kids W started airing it, so they decided to just be cheap and not finance their own shows. Obviously, they're giving less money to Animaniacs, which you can tell in the animation, but they're just giving less money to shows overall, which is why they barely had any episodes of Hysteria or Freakazoid or anything.
Also, I think that we can kind of tell a little bit, but not that much. But I feel like there was less. I think that there was like a little bit of an edge sanded off and got the Kids WB. I don't know like how true this actually is. We can kind of feel it there's a little bit of an edge taken off. Like if you compare some of the raunchier jokes from like the Fox Kids era are kind of comparable to some of the jokes of the old Looney Tunes, and basically they kind of ripped them off. Like the "Give Me the Bird" joke from the classic Tweety short "Tale of Two Kitties," I think it was. You know what else had that title, right? Anyways,
Please stop making these references.
they basically replicate that joke in the Warner short with the turkey. So I think they had a lot of stuff like that in the Fox Kids era, more replicating the classic Looney Tunes, but it became a little bit more sanded down and more reliant on references of the time, kind of like how the
Well,
original Looney Tunes in the '60s.
it kind of became sanded down, but also more cynical. So it's like it's trying to be more, it's trying to make up for the fact that they just don't even do that much indulgence anymore, but just randomly becoming more cynical and referencing everything. So it's just not really a good balance. It's like them trying to be more cynical with that awful Pocahontas episode. It's trying to like them trying to be more cynical, but at the same time they just don't really have that answer. Just go for the stupid cheap jokes of Disney making billion sequels and wanting money, and Pocahontas not having any good songs or whatever. It was a lie, by the way. Close the way.
Also, there's this really weird joke where they just talk about ice cream out of nowhere and it's like not even funny. I don't really know why they did that. I mean, maybe there's like some universe where that joke's funny, but it's not this universe and not in this episode. And like the funniest part about that is that in the background there's like mustard and gravel flavored ice cream. I think that was like the funniest part, and I think that maybe having that unfunny, pointless joke was worth it to get visuals of mustard and gravel ice cream in the background.
It's probably the worst thing I've ever heard in my whole life. That big like TikTok recipe or something. So I guess there is something to get out of that after all. But even though Animaniacs, the later seasons, specifically seasons 4 and 5, quality is like called into question, I think that the first season of Animaniacs especially is just so great that it outweighs the rest of the show, which isn't really that good. I think it's like a actually it's not really like a Futurama situation because with Animaniacs the best season is like the majority of the show. So if you think about like Animaniacs being a normal show with a normal amount of episodes per season, you would think that since the other seasons suck that it would be bad. But Animaniacs, the first season, that's basically like all you need to watch, and maybe Wacko's West if you want to be a completionist. But that first season,
Well, I
you
wouldn't
basically
say
just
that.
ignore the rest.
Well, I think that season three has like enough quality stuff to offer. You could also watch that. Also, there's like one really good segment in season two, which is the troll one. Well, not it's not like really good, but it's like good.
And there's some little bits and pieces of other funny moments and other stuff. So actually, the whole show is worth watching. So just ignore what I just said.
So anyway, let's
Animaniacs is overall a good show, even though in later seasons there's a lot more duds. There's still some good stuff.
should we go to Pinky and the Brain?
Well, first
What?
uh, we'll discuss Tasmania when we talk about Space Twin Mysteries, and we're gonna talk about that after we talk about Freakazoid. And we'll just throw Hysteria in there for like 2 seconds, just in case.
For
But
us
we could talk
Hysteria
about,
fans,
yeah, we could talk about Pink and the Brain. This recording is almost 2 hours long,
it was
so
4 6 in the morning exactly. Well, it doesn't matter.
yeah. We're gonna stop this recording so that we can like signify a second part. And just in case my phone starts disintegrating after I stop
It's
this.
not overheating, surprisingly.